So the next speaker, if Ada can't make it, would be Gabriel Saldariaga, if I pronounce that correctly. Gabriel, are you here?
Yes, I'm here. You did well.
Lovely.
Sound is very Spanish.
I try. So yes, Gabriel and I and Isabel, who's also on the call, are working together. But today, Gabriel is going to give a talk about the impact of stressful life events on the mental health of older adults in Colombia. And Gabriel, are you able to share your screen for this?
Yes, give me a minute, please. Okay, this one. Sure. Okay, do you see it?
Yeah, your camera is a bit fuzzy. Not sure about that.
Okay, there.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So,
okay.
you just tell me when I will start, and I will do it.
Yeah, feel free to start.
Okay.
I've got back in, but I've missed the video.
Okay. So first, say hello. My name is Gabriel Saldarriaga. I'm participating from Colombia. I'm in Medellin right now. And I want firstly to thank Clarissa for the invitation to participate in this wonderful event. Furthermore, I will present the advances of a very interesting research about mental health of the elderly that is being conducted right now in a small part of Colombia. It's a municipality called Turbo. It's in the north, is close to the sea, to the Darien part, where there is very selvatic, and is the part that connects Central America with South America. The principal researchers are Clarissa, Isabel Zuluaga, she's here also, and I am one of the researchers. This project in particular, I will put it here, was funded by the Newton Caldas Fund. That's a collaboration between the NIHR and the Colombia Ministry of Science. The institutions participating, executing the funds are the University of Liverpool, the University of Antioquia, and the majority of Turbo. This region in particular in Colombia is very underdeveloped. There has not been many studies about the elderly there, how they age. In the whole region, not just the municipality. So there is really a need there for not only doing research, but for improving the way that the mental health interventions should be conducted. So it's also a region, we will see it in a minute, that has been very affected by the conflict in Colombia, because that region is one of the main routes of the drug trafficking. So it's very affected by violence and by conflict. So it's a very difficult part of the country, and the elderly there are really, they really feel alone and under service by the government or by any other institution. So the aim of this research is to explore the effects that interpersonal violence and the pandemic and and COVID have had on mental health in people over 60 years of age in the district of Turbo, Antioquia, favoring the design of a community-based strategy to address the identified situations. So we want not just research how they are in terms of mental health, how they are aging, how they perceive their aging, but we also want to develop. This is a very deep connection we have with the region, and we want to develop something that they could use that can serve their needs in terms of mental health. Yeah. So the methodology we are using for this study, this is a research with a mixed approach. We are using qualitative and quantitative techniques. We are collecting quantitative and qualitative data, and we are proposing an intervention after the data is analyzed and everything is done. So we have seven objectives. It's a very ambitious project, but I think we can do it. We are already on the collection phase of the project, the data collection phase of the project. We want to have a picture of the situation of mental health of the elderly there. That means collecting quantitative data that can be compared and that can inform us how they are. This is a representative study. We are doing a survey with some instruments. After that, we will also collect data about how interpersonal violence and the context of the armed conflict or intrafamiliar violence also have affected them. We want to have a description of that relationship. We also are introducing the variable of COVID because we think that that variable introduced a lot of stress for the elderly, because here in Colombia, the measures were very restrictive with the elderly. People over 70 years, they couldn't go out even to buy in the supermarkets their food. It was a very restrictive for them. So that and the way that society reacted to the elderly, that caused a lot of stress to the elderly in Colombia in general, but also in Turbo. We will want to characterize what are the needs of this elderly, what are the needs of the people that care for them, the family carers, and also what are the needs of the institutions that provide mental health services. That is going to help us to better understand not only the mental health of the elderly in Turbo, but also how the institutional networks are functioning there. So we can propose, design and propose an intervention that is it will have really effects on the population. So we need to map the institutional services, the services that are offered there, and that way we can just propose something that will have effects. We want also to create a collaborative network of researchers between the University of Antioquia, the University of Liverpool, that could promote an exchange of knowledge between the two institutions that could strengthen the network and help us facilitate the continuation of any proposal we have in Turbo. Okay. A little bit of context. Colombia, it's an aging country. It's accelerating. People in Colombia is aging with no income mostly, or very little income. This is a product of the historical income inequality in Colombia. Colombia, the last reports says, is one of the highest countries with income inequality. The COVID pandemic also affected a lot of people here in Colombia. And the conflict that we understood was finished because the peace accords that were signed in 2016 is really alive. The conflict is not between the guerrillas right now. There is one group in the country active now, but it's mostly against drug trafficker bands. So the regions that are part of the roots of the drug trafficking are really affected by this continuing conflict we have here in Colombia. Turbo, they have a lower percentage of elderly than the nation, than Colombia. But because they are mostly into the rural areas, the consequences of these are harder for them. So it's a percentage that is growing also. Most of them don't have any income. Sometimes the government send them some money, but that is very few. Most of the families are below the poverty line, and COVID really affected most of the population in Turbo. The positivity rates when the tests were done, it was almost 40% of the population positive. We think that most of the people in Turbo was infected by the virus at some moment. So we have this context, and we are going there. We are collecting qualitative data. We want to present some of the results of these first interviews. We have now 16 interviews with the elderly in Turbo. We have data from 3 focus groups. We have been collecting data in the urban and rural areas, and we have some data to share with you right now. We're still collecting the quantitative and the qualitative data, but let's see what we have found. Okay, we found that aging, the age inequality, aging in Turbo is aging in really an inequality setting. People accumulate during their life course different types of vulnerabilities that have effects on the type of aging they live. They recognize that. In the interviews, they see how the lack of opportunities, the lack of formal employment has affected the way they are aging. The problem is mostly low quality education, low access to education. The elderly we are interviewing, most of them don't have finished the 7 years of school. some of them don't know how to read or write. So that accumulates as a vulnerability and really affect the way they age. We have detected differences in the way the elderly in the rural or urban areas are aging. The rural areas are really unequal in terms of access to services, even health, not just mental health, but health. They don't have secure food. It's very depend on the security of the region, of the logistics, that the things they grow really grow. So they don't have food security. Many parts, they don't have even water, clean water to drink. It depends on people bringing water in tanks or selling them water bottles. So in the rural areas, really is bad for them. There is also a difference in the way that women represent or they perceive how they're aging. Is different than the way the men perceive their aging process. There is something that have to be with the conflict also. Many of the women in the 80s, 70s, many of them don't have their husband with them because they lost them, or maybe they lost the male children because the conflict. So for them is harder. We have also found that Turbo is not an homogeneous, ethnically homogeneous region. There are people with that comes as immigrants to the region. They came many years ago. They established themselves there, and they bring some of the cultural traditions. There are mainly three cultures there, some from the Pacific. Those are African heritage. We have indigenous people, and we also have people from the interior of the country, from the center part, from the mountain part of the country. And those three have different histories, backgrounds. Ethnically, they are very different. We have also found a problem in Turbo with how they see the elderly there. There is not a lot of recognition of the role of the elderly in Turbo society. The elderly there don't have any political participation. There is no organization created for them. The services that they get are in the hospital, and there is a program that the municipality implemented, but there is also one person with 3 helpers for almost 14,000 elderly in Turbo. People don't think about aging there, and they don't think that much about the elderly. We have also found that many report they have faced barriers to access to mental health services. They have out-of-pocket expenses. They cannot pay for transport for going to a hospital in the urban areas. There are not any special programs aimed to help them in the region. Many of them don't have their basic needs satisfied. I mean, food, water. So when we ask them what they think is mental health, many of them just respond to us. It's to have food, is to have secure food, is having to eat. Okay, how they deal with all this? Okay, we have some data that bring religion as a main coping strategy for them. They don't go to any psychology or psychiatrist. They just go to the preacher, or go to some of their ancestral practices for anything close to a mental health problem. There is a lot of social support between the elderly, not in intergenerational support. The youngest they really don't care that much about the elderly. But between them, they have some small groups, support groups, physical activity groups that help them to cope with the stress they feel because the way they're aging, because the history of violence, because the COVID. And I think that that's something positive for them. There is also one thing about the pandemic is that for some people, the pandemic helped them to get access to some money from the government. The government increased a little bit the subsidies they were giving to the elderly, so they could get a little more. But also because the vaccination started, the government just took that little bit of money from them, and they really feel like betrayed, and for them that's very bad. So what's next for us? We expect to finish data collection at the end of this year. We want to analyze the data, quantitative and qualitative. We want to create reports about the findings that will help us in the design of this community intervention we want to propose to Turbo. We want to implement the intervention, and we want to disseminate the findings in the region so it could be replicated in other municipalities. So that's where we are now, and I thank you for the attention. And any question, I'm here.
Thank you very much, Gabriel. And let it be known that Gabriel joined this conference from the start, which was around 4 a.m. Colombian time. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay, so
it was very early, yeah.
The most dedicated speaker, I would think the award goes to.
I'm really happy to be here. It's no problem for me.
So I realize this is more of a going outside the UK sphere on this conference day, and there'll be another one looking at low and middle income countries as well afterwards. But I thought it's important because at Liverpool we are doing research internationally as well, and we can learn from the research that is being done in countries such as Colombia with older people and with people with dementia and carers, and take some learning back to the UK. And also you were talking about the inequalities as well that people are experiencing. Inequalities don't necessarily just happen in let's say, a low and middle income country, but also the northwest coast region of England is really disadvantaged and there are pockets of deprivation. So there can be similarities drawn in those inequalities. So I've got a question about when you spoke of religion, Gabriel, playing a role for people. Do you mean faith or the religious structure?
Okay, we have found something interesting. Colombia in general is a very Catholic country, but Catholicism didn't help people in Turbo that much. We haven't found that yet a clear answer for why not. But in that region, mostly the religion that people accepted was what we call here Protestant. It's evangelical denominations, mostly from the United States. So it's apart from the Catholic Church that is very strong in the country. So they found that in those churches they could have some kind of acceptance. They have social support there, and that's the way they are building these strategies to face the stress they are living. Yes, for us it was something new.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, certainly the religious angle will come up in the next talk again as well. Faith seems to play a big role. Yeah. So unless there are any other questions from you, have a lot of positive feedback here, Gabriel, as well in the chat. So thanks for sharing.
Thank you.
Good. So if anyone still has any questions, just please pop them in the chat box and I'm sure Gabriel will pick them up. And we've got Isabel as well, who's also working on this project, and she might reply as well. So thank you very much, Gabriel.
Thank you.
And now I'm going to, if you could unshare your screen, Gabriel.
Okay, I'm trying. Stop. Yeah.
Okay, super. So kind of picking up on what Gabriel was just talking about, I'm going to give a little bit of an overview of some more ALMIC research, we say, low and middle income country research into older people and people with dementia. So I'm just going to get this on big screen now. Just bear with me a second. Multiple screens aren't helpful. Can you see a little screen in the future screens of future slides as well right now? I think so.
I think, Chris, if you click on display settings and then swap your screen.
I would, but I've got this Zoom box which doesn't seem to disappear at the top, so I can't. Oh, this is frustrating. I can't access it. My Zoom is frozen. Right, let me just try again. Sorry about that. That's when you host and present the fun. Right. So here we are. Oh. Can you see what screen now, Kerry?
Your PowerPoint.
With a black in the background again, or?
No, just the slides, as in like they're not presented yet, just on PowerPoint.
I am sorry about this. This is not helpful. Let me just, sorry.
If you put it onto slideshow when you get onto your PowerPoint, that might work.
I try, but I've got 3 different PowerPoints open now, and one. Right, there we go.
Can you slideshow on that one?
Yeah,
There
I
you go.
can't access it because the taskbar, the Zoom task, I'm sorry, I have to show it like this. The Zoom taskbar is on top of it. It's really frustrating.
Yeah, I can see. Yeah.
No, I can't. Okay, sorry about that. So I will give you a little bit of an overview of some research we've been involved with at the University of Liverpool into the long-term psychological impacts of COVID-19 restrictions on older adults in low and middle income countries, which we usually refer to as LMICs. So as Gabriel was just referring to, we are involved in a very large project, specifically in Colombia, but in this particular talk, I'll be talking about two separate yet slightly related projects. Initially, we conducted a project with Uganda, with the African Research Center on Aging and Dementia, the ARCAT, in June 2020, where the...
I have to...
Hello? Someone's talking in the background, where the African collaborators conducted interviews with older adults living in the community. Based on that research, and based on those findings, we were lucky enough to receive some additional funding to understand the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic and the restrictions more broadly, not just in older adults, but also in unpaid carers, in people living with dementia, in Uganda, India, and Colombia. So first of all, I'm just going to share a little bit of the findings from our Uganda-based research. So looking at the Ugandan older adult population, roughly around 4% are aged 60 and above. So that's also a thing when we talk about low and middle income countries. When we talk about older adults, we refer to people aged 60 and above due to the reduced life expectancy. Usually we refer to 65 or 70 and above. And older people are considered to be among the poorest members of society. So they are often reliant on their younger children or even their grandchildren for food, money, income, and living with them. So multi-generational households often. And so overall in Uganda, and particularly for the older adult population, there's very poor access to basic necessities, so food, water, and healthcare. And we will show shortly how that's been affected even further by the pandemic restrictions. So just kind of a bit of background about the ARCAT. So they've been conducting quite a bit of research in the past few years. They're also very heavily involved on social media if you want to follow them, and you can go on their webpage. So they really have quite a nice spectrum of work that's going on there, and very lovely to work with as well. So there we go. So specifically, as you saw on the first slide, on the second slide, we've conducted 30 interviews with older adults living in the community. So there were outside urban areas, so kind of semi-urban, semi-rural areas. So they were remote interviews that the African collaborators conducted via the phone with older adults. And this was not necessarily on the mental health impact at first, but we really wanted to understand back in June 2020, so still quite early in the pandemic, what have been the impacts of restrictions on older adults' lives, older adults that already live in very disadvantaged circumstances. The first, and I think biggest impact really, were the economic impacts. And I think particularly the second quote here to illustrate that is quite sad and shocking. The price for food is now so high, we can no longer afford 2 meals a day, so we end up eating one. And that was not just 1 out of 30, but that was pretty much everyone who said, we don't have enough money anymore. We're reliant on charity or friends or family or the community. And one thing to bear in mind, so these older adults, they do not have a pension. Instead, they often work patches of land, patches of farmland, and the produce they are getting from that farmland is for themselves, but any extra produce they are selling either on the market or in a little, I suppose, just outside their house on a little shop, little own market stall, basically. But because of the pandemic and restrictions, they weren't able to do that anymore. They weren't able to access their farmland any longer because it was a few kilometers away, and public transport wasn't really that accessible, particularly for older people. It was expensive as well to pay for the bus fare, but also markets were closed. There was no footfall even in their own roads because people weren't going to work at that point in time of the restrictions. And just to kind of say again, I was just saying how shocking it was to read that quote. Having conducted research in high-income countries on the impact of COVID on older people and people with dementia, and then reading through 30 transcripts of how older adults in Uganda have been affected, it was really an absolute difference and really upsetting to read those transcripts. And basic necessities. So people weren't having as much money anymore to pay for things. So that impacted on their ability to buy food. But also it seemed to have an impact on sending their grandchildren to school if the schools were indeed open, because people had to make those really difficult decisions. Well, the very, very little savings we have, we rather have to buy some food as opposed to sending our children to school. And again, that will have long-term implications on that generation having missed school as well. And referring back to the transport issue, so the public transport was very reduced, and older adults weren't, it seemed to be not able or not allowed to access public transport because of the higher risk of COVID mortality. So they weren't allowed to use public transport. And again, as you can see here, that affects people accessing farmland or seeing people generally traveling and commuting, which then also had an impact on their ability to access healthcare. Hospitals were usually far away, and Gabriel was referring to the healthcare implications as well. So many people were instead relying on alternative medication, which could be accessed often in their own villages. But again, that is not necessarily the healthcare that people need. So again, this will likely have long-term implications on the physical health, but maybe also mental health of older adults living in Uganda. So those were some of the kind of quick through findings of the Uganda study. And based on these, we also obviously found the emotional impacts of being unable to see their relatives and being unable to go to church on a Sunday, or particularly increased funerals of friends because of the pandemic. And that really affected people very badly. So we thought we want to specifically look at the long-term psychological impacts of those restrictions, not just in Uganda, but also in Colombia, working with Gabriel and Isabel, but also working with contacts in India, in Kerala specifically. And yes, this looks like an awful lot of data, and it will take us some time to get through all of this, but we're a good team, international team. So what has happened? All of the data are now collected. Specifically, we wanted to look at 2 different time points. So this is a qualitative piece of work. At baseline, 90 interviews in total were conducted across the 3 countries. Specifically, in each country, 30 interviews were conducted. 10 with older adults, 10 with people with dementia, and 10 with unpaid carers, family carers. And the collaborators also conducted 1 focus group each in the country at baseline with health and care professionals, or even community organizations that provide care, to understand it from a different point of view. So not just the people that might need the care, but also the people that are providing the care. And that was around February, April time, also a bit delayed with the pandemic. And in the last couple of months, all the follow-up interviews and focus groups have been completed with a subsample of people. And obviously, these are all conducted in different languages. So what we're doing is each country is analyzing their transcripts themselves. All of those transcripts have also been translated or are still being translated into English so that we in the UK can also read through them through a subsample, not all of them. And then we have been holding regular team meetings to come together and see, oh, what seems to come out of the data. An awful lot comes out of the data, as you might expect. And I'll give you a very brief highlight of what we have found so far. Picking up on a quote that Gabriel was mentioning earlier in terms of, I think it was, there's no mental health, people instead are looking at food, something like that, Gabriel, in your talk. Again, we've picked this up here as well across the countries, that even though researchers were asking specifically, how are you feeling? How do you feel that the pandemic has impacted you, etc. So really trying to understand the impact on their mental well-being. People weren't necessarily going into that, but instead, people were really worried about their basic necessities, as in having enough money, having enough food, going to the hospital if they need to. But looking at their mental well-being was almost neglected. Yes, they could be anxious at times, but overall there was this underlying theme of we need access to basic necessities, which was interesting because in some of our UK research, that it was the opposite. People were very eloquent about their mental health and well-being. Also, we found an impact on social isolation. But here you can see two quotes that are almost showing different angles on how people have perceived the social isolation aspect. So on the left side is a quote from an Indian older adult, and they were very upset about not being able to go and engage in religious activities, and also being unable to see their children who are abroad, and generally the inability to connect with friends and religious activities. Now, on the other hand, you have a quote which is showing an older person that is living in Uganda. And they were saying, oh, actually, I'm really happy because my grandchildren are all here. And those that are not around of my family, I talk to them on the phone. So there is that angle of multi-generational households, but also accessing digital technology that has helped people. And actually the technology angles seem to be different in different countries. So we noticed already that in Colombia, people seem to have much easier access to smartphones, older adults. Whereas in Uganda, people could be reliant on accessing a phone via their children, or they had a very, very basic phone, but not necessarily smartphone. Again, that's also to do with coverage. Another thing we found, which is replicating the findings that we found in the UK, and again, we still have to fully analyze the data, but because we also spoke to many unpaid carers and people with dementia, that there seemed to be a poorer understanding of the restrictions in people with dementia, which in turn made them feel anxious and upset, particularly what we heard from the carers. So people didn't necessarily understand why are people wearing face masks, social distancing, etc., and why can't I see my loved ones, my grandchildren, etc. So I think it's interesting that there are some similarities that we find with previous research in higher income countries, and that's why it's important to understand the impact of the restrictions on older people and people with dementia in different contexts, cultures, situations. And the last highlight that seemed to emerge is looking at domestic violence, something we didn't plan on looking at, but it came out in a few interviews, particularly in Colombia so far, because people were more cooped up together, and particularly sometimes with the multi-generational households and often the reduced space. So you have a larger number of people in quite a small space living together, that seem to have led also to incidences of domestic violence. As you can see here in the quote, not just for older adults, but generally across the population. But we'll get some more quotes out of the transcripts for that. But this is really just a highlight, brief summary of the findings. And as you can see here, we've got Isaac Dumba and Ivan Bera from ARCAD, and we've got Maria Isabel and Gabriel from Colombia, and we've got Dr. P. Suresh from India. So I hope that was of interest, have a bit more of an Elmic angle to this conference. And I'm going to stop share now. Right. So if there are any questions, please feel free to pop them in now. But if not, which is absolutely fine, we've got our final speaker for the day, and that is Fran. We've got a question, Gabriel. Has intrafamily violence also increased in the UK? I can't speak for certain on that, but there seem to be some pieces in the news throughout the pandemic. Gabriel, yes. I'm not an expert, but there were some reports in the news, yes. And we've got here from Helen, care homes are reporting more resident on resident. Oh, I wasn't aware of that. So we've done care home research, but we've not come across this. Helen, do you want to elaborate on that a little? Has anyone else come across that? Resident on resident issues in care homes? Which is also relevant for Fran's next talk, actually. Well, if not, chat box remains there, but Fran, if you want to share your screen, because now we've got your talk.
Thanks, Clarissa. So, does that come up okay?
Yeah.
Well, okay. Is that all right? Shall I go ahead?
Yeah, go for it.
Thanks, Clarissa. Okay, so hi everyone, I'm Fran. I am a trainee clinical psychologist. So I'm on the Doctorate in Clinical Psychology programme at the University of Liverpool. And as part of this programme, we do a thesis, so kind of a big research project. And the topic that I've chosen is the topic of sexuality in care homes. I'm doing this project alongside, kind of being supervised by Clarissa and also Sarah Butchard. I also just want to say at this point that I am a very kind of early stage researcher. I'm by no means an expert in this area. It's something that I think is really interesting. So I'm kind of coming at this that I'm, really glad of this opportunity to come and talk, and any feedback would be really brilliant. Okay, so some of the background. So this topic of sexuality in older age is obviously a huge topic, and there's loads of different points that could be talked about for a long time and are very important. So this isn't to say that this is everything here, but these are just some of the things that I wanted to kind of mention. So firstly, the kind of myth of asexuality in older age. So just generally thinking about in society, that it's often thought that when people get older, they're no longer kind of sexual beings. And actually that's not the case. The definition of sexuality is very much that it covers across the lifespan. And that sexual identity is still really important, no matter when people get older. Also, obviously, the importance of dementia in care homes, the impact that dementia can have on people in terms of changes in behaviour and changes to cognition and what that can mean for capacity. And of course, that includes things around sexual behaviour, and also thinking about naturally that relationships form in care homes, and so the importance of thinking about capacity and consent in that way. Another thing that really came up from reading a lot of the literature around this was the importance to think about people from the LGBT community in regards to being in a care home. There was one recent paper, a systematic review that was just published a couple of years ago, and that focused around, so that was actually talking to adults, but around their perceptions of going into care homes, residential aged care. And one of the quotes that kind of really stood out was this idea of fear about being forced back into the closet. So real kind of concerns that their sexual orientation perhaps wasn't going to be given the consideration that it needs. And so this is just a few things that come under this topic. This is a huge area, like I said. And so we really got to thinking about the role of staff. I kind of reflected a bit on having worked as a support worker myself years ago, not actually with older adults, it was with younger adults with learning disabilities, but thinking about the training that I had, which was brilliant, really, really brilliant training. But I couldn't really recall the area of sexuality being talked about all that much. And there was a review done again just recently. There was a scoping review looking at education training for staff in care homes, and it proved, it showed that it can have a real impact on people's knowledge and attitudes, but that there's just a real lack of it out there. And then also just thinking about other things, so other factors for staff when it comes to thinking about sexuality in care homes. And one of the big things that comes up in the literature is the idea of embarrassment. It can be really embarrassing for people to talk about, I think for anybody, for all of us. This topic, it raises a lot of things for everyone. It can, both professionally and personally, it can feel difficult to talk about. And so kind of factoring all of this in, it made us think about wanting to explore further how it is for staff. What do we need to do to best support them to be able to talk about this in work, to then in turn best support the residents. So this research, like I've kind of just said, so the idea is that we want to best develop an understanding of people working in care homes and their experiences of supporting residents and their needs related to sexuality. So the way in which we're going about this is, so I'm doing interviews with staff members. That's one-to-one interviews. They are remote. Ideally, we would have had it that I would have been able to go into care homes, kind of introduce myself, introduce the research, kind of recruit that way, but obviously that's not been possible. So it is a case of recruiting online. I'm doing the interviews online themselves. And then we have like what we call a topic guide. So there are some predetermined questions, which were so they were created alongside some public advisors. So it was consulting with people who have a diagnosis of dementia, people who have a spouse in care homes, and together thinking about what it is that we really want to get out of this research. So the questions are generated to kind of create discussion around how staff feel about this topic, what some of their views are on it, and then how they feel about talking about it in work. What makes them feel like it is possible to raise, and what they perhaps feel like they need more support on. And then eventually it will be, once we finish data collection, and this is an ongoing process as well, is around doing something called grounded theory, which is something that I'm kind of learning as we're going along. And that's about bringing together all the data, so it's qualitative, and developing like a theory of all of this. So our hopes for implications, so kind of why are we doing this? So like I've said a couple of times, so ultimately it's just to gain a greater, more in-depth understanding of staff's perspectives, to really kind of highlight areas that require more attention. So that's both in terms of what staff are telling us, what do they need, what do they think would help to make it more possible to talk about this, to talk about the topic of sexuality. And also what else might come through in the data that that might kind of show that needs more attention. And then ultimately it's about contributing to the evidence base, and so thinking about future training packages, policies, procedures in care homes, kind of thinking about influencing those. So at the moment, so this is very much in progress. It's all been approved, we've had ethics approval, that's all been okay. And then I'm just in the midst of recruiting and conducting the interviews themselves at the moment. So far we've conducted 3. And like I said, it's an ongoing process with data analysis. So we look at what's coming up in the data and then use that to inform some of the questions that we go on to ask, to make sure that we get as much information as possible. And then it will be a case of writing up all the findings. And we've thought about the publication. So we'll be looking to publish in a journal and as part of my qualification, but also really making sure that this is fed back to those that are taking part and any care homes that are interested in the findings. Also, alongside the research project itself, we're conducting a systematic review. And because of, like I said earlier, the limited data that there is on training around sexuality, we've extended this out and we kind of broadened it to look at any training that's ever been done around adult sexuality in residential settings. So that's anything under health and social care. And even then, there's still quite a limit in terms of how many papers have actually been written on this. But the idea around that is to again look and see what's already been done, what's working, to kind of bring this all together and think about what's going to be most helpful going forward. So leading on from this, just a little kind of shameless call out. If anyone at all might be interested in taking part, if you yourself are a carer working in a care home, or if you know of anybody who might want to take part, or have a kind of any ideas of where might be good to advertise, I'd be really grateful. We're trying to share as much kind of on Twitter and online to really kind of get it out there. So yeah, if you know anything that might help with that, that would be brilliant. That's it. Thank you very much. Thank you for listening.
Thanks very much, Fran. So it's nice to see a project that's like in progress as well. So you don't just have the findings to present, but you're actively shaping and working on it. That's great. Yeah. So the question from Ginger is, are you comparing to LGBTQ+ patient experiences?
Can I mind saying that again?
So are you comparing, can you see the chat?
Yeah, so yeah, I'm just getting, oh, there we go. Are you comparing to, so can you say a bit more what you mean? So we're talking, so we're only talking to staff at this stage, and we do have a specific question around LGBT+ residents experience. At this stage, the questions are really quite broad to get as much information and to allow staff to kind of speak as freely as possible to get as much information. I'm not sure if that answers your question though. I don't know.
As a care home open specifically for LGBT elderly that has recently opened?
Yes, yeah. So I have reached out to try and speak to there are a few care homes that kind of are very active in this area, and I have specifically reached out to try and speak to some of the staff that work there. Yeah, that's very much on the radar, yeah. And didn't that question only enter your sphere of research by talking to public advisors, or do I remember rightly, because you involve the public? Yeah, I mean, I think it was something that came up, and it was something that I discussed with a public advisor, because of we had that question around how kind of when we were going to ask it, because we were interested to see how it was naturally going to come up in the conversation. So I thought a lot with the public advisor about how to ask it, kind of when to ask it, to ensure that it was about making sure that the questions aren't too leading, and so that we kept it as broad as possible for staff to share all of their experiences.
Yeah, great. So I think that's all the questions we have. Thank you, Fran. So now that was all of our talks, and little nod to Debbie, who still has technical problems. We can switch off the recording now, because now we're going to go into breakout rooms. So the recording will be uploaded onto our ARC Northwest Coast YouTube channel, hopefully this week, and then you can look back at it, or people that couldn't join can look back at it, which is helpful. So now I'm going to share first of all in the chat, but don't click on anything yet, please, because I need to share my screen again and fail probably. So I hope you can see the slide now, which says breakout rooms. We're now going to go into different breakout rooms, and we have, as I mentioned at the beginning of the conference, 4 different ones. First one will look at care homes, led by Alice Griffith. The second one, which will be led by myself, I will be discussing with you the social care workforce and issues that are faced in that sphere. Room 3 will look at family carers, led by Warren Donnellan. And room 4 will look at inequalities and barriers to accessing care, led by Kerry Hanna. So those 4 rooms are on offer, so to say. So I'm going to stop sharing now. And here you should see the Zoom links. So basically, if you want to discuss